Okay, everybody, quick and easy. The meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，三下三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，三下多一点喘息，一鞠躬，开班，一鞠躬。And for anyone who may be curious what all that was, the email that I have sent out includes a couple of links in there that you can click on to get all the details on our class beginning ritual. Bill, the floor is all yours. I'm going to go on mute.
Thank you, sir, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to our online Tao study group. It's just a gorgeous, beautiful spring day here in Indianapolis. I can't tell you how happy I am to convey that to you. It's been a remarkably cold and kind of dreary winter, and I'm always very happy to see spring arrive. It's kind of my favorite season, and I'm always remarkably blessed to be allowed to live long enough to see another one come around. It's one of those things that I appreciate very much in my life. Okay, this morning the title says The Secret to Happiness. This is a topic very much like the meaning and purpose of life. Yeah, there are some there are some lessons and tips and practical applications of the teachings that that one can employ to try and create a happier life. But I expect to hear from more than a couple of folks, some of them here, that trying to answer the question about what the secret of happiness is kind of like trying to answer the question about what the meaning of life is. It's one of those great universal mysteries that we're not fully made to understand. In this particular case, I'm not sure I completely agree with that, and I'm going to tell you why. And this is, once again, just based on my own experience. You guys can all feel free to accept or reject anything that I say, and I promise you won't hurt my feelings either way. However, that being said, there are a few common things that I've observed over the years that seem to have a tremendous bearing on how happy people are. And in my own life, I've found that these things have made a lot of difference, both to me and my family and the people that are around me and close to me. Happiness really is where we look for it. It's more of a mental state, if you will, than it is a condition or something that's imposed upon us by others or by the universe. There's not some ethereal, mystical being out there who decides who gets to be happy and who doesn't. Those things are all contained within us. And knowing that, the conventional wisdom on what causes or what brings about or what makes us happy, if you will, tend to be pretty wide-ranging and sometimes spiritually extremely divergent from secular life. And I think for some folks it's difficult to merge the secular and the spiritual into a cohesive existence, but absolutely doing that is an essentiality to having a joyous and happy life. The common wisdom, if we go out and ask a whole bunch of people about what it is that makes them happy, we're going to hear things like, gee, if I had more money, if I was wealthier, if I could retire earlier, if I were more successful in my career, then I'd be happy. Or if I got to be the boss, if I got to get rid of that jerk that I worked for and I ran the show, then I'd be happy. Or if I were more handsome or beautiful, if people looked at me like they look at those TV stars, then I'd be happy. Prestige, fame, lots of possessions, lots of friends and acquaintances, are all things that I hear very, very frequently. If only I could have this, that, or the other thing, then I'd be happy. As if it's somebody else's responsibility to imbue happiness upon us. And great as that would be if it could happen, that just isn't the way things work. And in fact, in people who win very large sums of money from the lottery and things like that, what we tend to see in a lot of the cases is that in the near term, they're ecstatically happy. But in the long term, as they learn to deal with having a large amount of wealth and other people find out that they have it, their lives go from a standpoint of being ecstatically happy to being downright miserable, and sometimes to the extent of causing an individual or family to become very nearly hermits to keep everybody and their brother off of them. Once people find out that you have a lot of wealth, then the number of people who are lined up to help you spend it seems to go on forever. You start inheriting uncles, aunts, and cousins that you never knew existed. Okay, that doesn't lead to any kind of enduring and permanent happiness. Further, in the rapid acquisition of wealth, very rarely comes the change in attitudes and mental states that allow people to manage that skillfully and effectively. And very often those folks wind up just plain broke after a few years because they burn through that money way too quickly without paying attention to where it went. The wisdom of the Tao regarding being happy is a much shorter list. However, the items on the list sometimes require quite a bit of time to learn, and sometimes even longer to truly apply. But the list of Tao wisdom is a list of contentment and internal peace, moderation of our attachments and desires, and gratitude, letting go and reducing the ego self and the amount of stuff that we have to collect in order to try and fill that hole in our hearts. In short, our happiness all of a sudden becomes all dependent on us. And this is the point at which it seems some folks have a real issue with reconciling the secular and the spiritual life. When I tell folks that everything they need to be happy is already in them, very oftentimes they look at me like I have three heads. And then I hear, well, I've been trying for years and years and years and years, and nothing ever seems to work out. My relationships don't work. My jobs don't work out. I never have enough money. I never have enough of this or that or the other thing. Yeah, okay, that may be the truth. It doesn't change the fact that the key to being happy is always within us. It's not because we can make ourselves unbelievably independently wealthy, although that capacity exists in each of us as well. What it really is about is our perceptions and our attitudes. Okay, 99% of whether or not we're happy has to do with how we look at life. Okay, how we look at the occurrence of good fortune and misfortune, for instance. And we talk fairly frequently here, along with a couple of stories that Derek tells really well, about how good fortune isn't necessarily always the greatest thing in the world, and misfortune isn't necessarily always the worst. And yet, the common wisdom says that if we're going through a period of less than auspicious fortunes in our lives, that we must have done something to deserve punishment, or something in our karmic path means that we should be deprived of wealth and success and joy. And I don't believe that at all. I believe, in fact, exactly the opposite, that anyone can choose to be happy once they understand a bit about themselves and how that works. Prestige and fame don't work. We talk about about the perception and attitudes about those things, Lao-Tzu speaks of favor and disgrace, both causing a lot of tension and anxiety. Because if you have favor, you're afraid to lose it, and if you have disgrace, or if you're about to be disgraced, you don't want it. And in either case, it brings about an anxious and nervous and not very much fun life. Lao-Tzu also speaks about the differences between a respectful response and a scornful response, how much difference there is between those two. Because once again, both of those things bring about an anxious and tense and nervous mindset. What that means is that we need to adopt a more realistic and broader view of what it means to be happy, of what good fortune and misfortune mean, and what the appropriate place of those things in our lives are, as well as the appropriate place of our secular lives as they regard our existence and our spiritual lives. One of the things that Master William spoke to me about and is included in some of the items I've read when I became a Tianzu was that the expectation of me was that I would pay attention to my spiritual duties, even though they consume much less time than my secular duties. What I've found over the years is that in point of fact, my spiritual life precedes me in every area of my existence. What that means is that I'm continually in the back of my mind, either thinking through the rituals or thinking through the teachings or thinking through how to handle an upcoming situation better, or how to handle a situation that I find myself in skillfully and effectively. And those thoughts precede, in most cases, my words and actions. Every now and again, I still succumb to the occasional knee-jerk response, but not nearly as frequently as I used to. And boy, when that happens these days, am I ever embarrassed of myself because I allowed myself to respond without thinking. We always have a choice in our response to others. And again, this is one of the keys to being happy. If our emotions rule us, then we're battered around like a ball in a pinball machine from one crisis or one triumph to the next, however you want to look at it, from one occurrence of the glass being half empty to having it be full. or whatever metaphor or allegory one would like to attach to that. And as a result of being battered around by our emotions, we're not ever really truly stable or peaceful. And every day at work brings us situations, for instance, where we may feel more or less good about what's going on and may not have a great deal of control over what that is and what we have to do. It's just one of those things. But we do have the choice to respond to those things in a peaceful, tranquil, and thankful manner. And yes, even negative situations can be met with a certain amount of gratitude. Those situations show us where we need to refine our state of cultivation for a bit and help move ourselves a little bit further down the path. The other thing that I titled Awareness of Everything, Attachment to Nothing is that if we're emotionally driven, if we're not being driven by reason and compassion and an understanding of the Tao teachings in ourselves, then it's not possible for us to operate from a perspective of detached action. And the more attachments and desires we create in our lives, the more suffering we invite. Every attachment that we hang on to eventually is going to make us suffer in some way. It absolutely is. Why? Because eventually those attachments get removed. The story I use most frequently is that of my attachment to my wife. I'm extremely attached to her. I have a huge emotional investment in how she's doing, and keeping her healthy and keeping our marriage working and taking care of the kids and all that sort of stuff. And those are attachments that by my own choice I've not given up. I think those are important. But one of these days, probably me, but you never know, one of these days one of us is going to die. One of these days the relationship may dissolve for whatever reason. God forbid. But when that happens, whether it's my passing on, her passing on, or something else, the destruction of that attachment, of that relationship, is going to bring about suffering. It just is. And it is that way with every attachment. But knowing that, I'm no longer the victim of that attachment, but rather a person with an understanding that that was a conscientious and deliberate and thought out maintenance of an attachment. See, it is all about perception and attitude. Learning to understand ourselves helps us in every other regard in trying to be joyful and to live a happy and fulfilling life. Right? Lao Tzu says those who overcome others are strong. Those who overcome themselves are, doggone it, it slid right off the edge of my brain. I'm going to ask Derek to help me out on the quote. I should have written it in there. How embarrassing is that? See, it happens to me too. Anyway. My goodness, that's just pitiful. Now, if anybody has the word there, type it in. For the life of me, I cannot call that to mind right now. But you get the point. Learning to understand others also contributes to that state of happiness by eliminating friction and division and tension and conflict. Okay, using compassion to interact with other people, smoothing the path of our human relationships, and as I just really adequately demonstrated, having a sense of humor about the whole thing, all are keys to having a happy and joy-filled life. Okay, we can't really ever take it all too seriously, because none of us gets out of here alive. At the end of the day, it's about a life well lived, skillfully lived, and joyously lived. And boy, if we can't laugh at ourselves and others when we do silly things, if we can't let go of the attachments and the desires, if we can't make the conscientious choices, then we're going to suffer and we're going to hurt, and we're going to do so at our own hand. That's the biggest thing, is that we don't have to go through all of that, pain and suffering and tension. We choose to do that. When I say that happiness is how we make it, and it is where we look for it, it is important to bear in mind that the perspective that we're trying to avoid is the perspective of I and me. Anytime we hear ourselves saying I will, I won't, or mine, me, that sort of thing, we are typically speaking in terms of the ego self. And the more emotionally involved we are in I and me, the more deeply we're speaking about the ego self. It is more beneficial to us to consider things in terms of us and we instead of I and me. It allows us to apply the teachings of compassion and service to others and reducing the ego self, while still allowing us to get what we need to survive and thrive, and doing so without inflaming and irritating other people. That's important. The skids of those social interactions need to be lubricated with a little bit of grace and courtesy and humor. Otherwise, the interactions all come to a very rough and screeching halt. We need to realize that most of our suffering stems from I and me, right? The more invested we are in the ego, the more invested we are in the outcome of a situation, the greater the possibility for a lot of negative emotions and an awful lot of anxiety and suffering. And so if we can reduce our attachments and desires, we can grow our happiness and our peace because of the derision and friction and conflict that we eliminate from our lives in the process of reducing those things. When we get to the point where we begin to look at other people strictly as another soul on the path, and we look at ourselves in the very same light we look at them, then all of a sudden we're not dealing with us and them, or me and them. It's not derisive or divisive. It is simply just all us. The liberation from the negative emotional states that are caused by creating separation and division between people does wonders for one's contentment and happiness by reducing those attachments and getting rid of the excuses that we use to create problems with other people. You know, it's really easy to talk about how to create a happier and more joyous life. You know, I've been at this for many years now, and I don't always have a good day every day, but on the whole, I am a much happier and much more joyful person than I used to be. And I know, because I'm doing it now as we speak, that walking that path is very often much more difficult than talking about it. You know, as people, we tend to think of ourselves in the context of the physical body and the ego self. And the ego self, to a point, is a necessary existence in our lives. It's what causes us to eat when we need to eat, and breathe when we need to breathe, and do the things that preserve our lives. And yet it is also the most cruel and unforgiving master there is if we do not learn how to reduce the ego and rein in the tentacles of attachment and desire. Contentment and detachment and the moderation of our desires and self-knowledge and understanding are absolutely the keys to learning to be happy. And so while we're considering how it is that we're going to be happy, or what it is we're going to do to help make our lives more fulfilling and joyful, we need to start there and examine where we are on the path of Tao cultivation, and make an honest and realistic assessment of whether or not we really understand what contentment is, whether or not we really are able to act with detachment and to reduce the attachments in the ego self to the point where it's no longer completely consuming us. That self-knowledge and understanding is absolutely essential in all of those items, and are also causative in helping us to create that happier life. If we're looking outside of ourselves for our happiness, if we're looking to other people to make us happy, or to possessions or wealth or power or any of the other illusions of this world, we need to stop and take note of that and determine, you know, how much of that is helping us to be happy and how much of it's getting in the way. How much of ourselves are we sacrificing to remain, for instance, in a relationship that doesn't work, or to be around people that are essentially the modern day vampires of our age, looking for our money and our resources and our happiness and whatever else they can get from us, because they don't understand how to get it for themselves. You know, or when we're surrounded by those who are continually emotionally negative, continually needy, continually just generally sour folks, and we all know one at least. Anytime we look outside of ourselves to fulfill our spiritual needs. We are looking at an illusion. We're looking at a ghost. Our joy and our happiness cannot come from the people around us or from the stuff we collect and the things that we own. It only can come from within us. There is never enough stuff in the world to fill in that huge empty hole in a human heart that is created by the absence of spiritual refinement. So looking within becomes that critical and transforming secret to learning to be a happy and joyful person. Thank you all very much for letting me share with you this morning, and I hope you all have a really great rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Bill, thank you. I want to respond to your question, which was about chapter 33 from the Tao Te Ching. It's actually one of your favorite chapters, and
yes, it is.
It starts out, the first 4 lines are, those who understand others are intelligent, those who understand themselves are enlightened, those who overcome others have strength, those who overcome themselves are powerful. So
I knew that.
Now,
it slid right off the edge of my brain.
it definitely happens to all of us. And it's important to realize that those adjectives, those descriptions that we have, intelligence, enlightened, strength, powerful, they have specific meaning. When it says understanding others are intelligence, it's a harsh, judgmental kind of intelligence, a critical kind of intelligence. And those who understand themselves are enlightened, that is the enlightenment of spiritual wisdom. Those who overcome others have strength, that's basically brute strength, physical strength we're talking about. Those who overcome themselves are powerful. It's talking about authentic inner power. So probably most people who are listening in already are aware of this, but I think it bears repeating.
Thank you very much.